Good morning, everyone. Today is the 7th of November of the year 2007. I'm Darrell Peterson, a volunteer for the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today we have the honor and privilege of interviewing Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth D. Woodward, who was in the U.S. Army Air Corps and U.S. Air Force for 36 years, from 1942 to 1978. So we are going to talk to him about that and a lot of other things. And it's nice to have you here, Ken.
Okay, thank you, Darrell.
Could we start out with you spelling your name?
Okay,
And
I just turn it off, okay? Sit down there, and then we'll get him, and then do what you're just going to say right now. Okay?
Okay.
It's all yours.
Okay, so to start out, would you please spell your last name?
Wait. Okay, push that right there first and see. Record. There you go.
Okay. To start out, could you spell your last name and tell us when and where you were born?
Last name is Woodward, W-O-O-D-W-A-R-D. Born in Portland, Oregon in 1918.
Okay. Can we start a little bit about your family and what did your father do and your mother and
Well, my
a little
father,
background on them?
my father was an electrician and a farmer. My great-grandfather came across the plains in when he was 10 years old, and they settled in Dallas, Oregon. My grandfather there had a farm, and my dad was raised on this farm, which was just out of Salem, Oregon. And after he finished high school, went to college, junior college for 1 year, and became an electrician, went to work for the Portland General Electric in Portland, but also bought a farm. He liked to farm, so we had a 20-acre farm out of Hillsboro near Portland, and that's where I grew up at 3 years old when we went there. And it was a good life, because during the Depression, when food was scarce, my dad always had a job, and even though he was cut to 4 days a week, and we always had food, cows and milk and that stuff.
So your grandparents, what country, were they first generation immigrants or?
Well, no, they came from, I don't know how far back to go, but quite a ways, but because I know when they came across the plains and shortly after the Civil War, I think they started at St. Louis, Missouri, and some came from Detroit. I know there's a Woodward Avenue in Detroit. I don't know any relatives to that. But and my mother, on my mother's side, they were German immigrants at about the same time. And my mother, that's interesting, my mother was a telephone operator in Salem, Oregon. And my dad was working for the telephone company at that time, and he was out checking a line, and he called in and called in Central. He said, "Hello, Central, this is a maintenance man." And he got talking with her on the phone and liked her voice, so he got a date with her. And they ended up getting married.
Great. Good story. Did you have any brothers or sisters?
I had one sister.
Okay. And so you basically were brought up on a farm then? And,
Yeah, really was. And, but then in high school, when we got through high school, I decided that I wanted to go to college. Didn't know what I wanted to take, and had to save up some money for tuition, so I got a job in a prescription pharmacy in Portland, Oregon. And this is a flunky and helping make, in those days we manufactured a lot of this stuff, and they broke me on how to make pills and that stuff. So anyway, I ended up going to pharmacy school at Oregon State.
Okay, so what your grade school years, what kind of a school was that?
Oh, it was a nice little country grade school. It was
with all the grades?
Yes, it had everything, 1st to 8th grade. but we had separate rooms. The first grade was first and second, then third, fourth, and fifth, and then sixth, seventh, and eighth.
Okay, and high school was,
It was a union high school. We went by bus 3 miles away.
okay.
Great
That's
high
pretty
school.
close.
It was very
Great.
good, yeah.
Okay. And, okay, did you have involvement with any religious organizations when you were growing up?
Oh yes, when I was young, my dad and mother were both Christians, and we went to a small church in Orenco, Oregon, near where we lived. It was a Presbyterian church, and I grew up Presbyterian.
Okay. Did you play sports in school, or did you
Well,
have to go home and milk the cows?
intramural, yeah, I usually had to go home on the bus and do my tours, so I was, interesting thing, I was going to play, I was too small for football, but I was out there one day, I played flag football, and I was playing end, and I could catch passes pretty good. And the coach saw me one day, and he says, "Why don't you come out and try for the B, go for the B team?" I said, "Okay," so I did. Well, in those days, they played both ways, offense and defense. Well, I'm fine on offense, but one day I'm playing defense, and then this double wing, 4 blockers and the 3 blockers of tailback came around my end right over me, and it took me about 10 minutes to wake up. So I gave up football.
Rough game. What were your favorite subjects in school? Were you interested in aviation from the beginning, or?
Oh, I was, but in those days, my aviation experiences happened. My dad took me for a ride with Tex Rankin in Portland, Oregon, that was giving rides for $1 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I took just a college prep course. I did take secretarial course, I took shorthand and typing, which turned out to be pretty good for me, business English and all that.
Great. Did you get to have a car during?
A car?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When was your first car?
Model T Ford Roadster. I bought it for $25 from another guy when I was a junior in high school.
Oh, really? You had one early then.
Yeah.
Great. What year did you graduate then from high school?
In 1936.
36.
I laid out for 1 year to make some money, and then I enrolled at Oregon State in pharmacy. So I started there in 37. Ended up being in the class of 42. Took me 5 years because I laid out for 1 year.
Okay. And you took up aviation sometime during that?
Yeah, I was a
college?
junior in college in pharmacy school, and they started a civilian pilot training where you could learn to be a pilot, and you'd take your ground school at night there 3 nights a week and learn theory of flight, meteorology, navigation, and all that stuff. And during the day, we'd go over to the airport there and fly a J-3 Piper Cub or a side-by-side Taylorcraft. So bottom line, it's a lot of fun. I got my pilot's license. And that turned out to be a major thing in my life also.
Okay. So that, what, do you remember what you were doing on December 7th, 1941?
I sure do. I was in the fraternity house at Oregon State about 10 in the morning, down reading the Sunday paper, and we had the radio on. And all at once news came over flash, Japanese had just attacked Pearl Harbor. And I had already enlisted or applied to the Army Air Corps for cadet training, and I had passed the physical, and I was all set to go after I graduated. So I did anyway.
Okay. Do you remember what the public attitudes were? There was, the Germans were active before December 41, and what, do you remember how people were thinking about?
Oh, I certainly do, and very interesting about the Germans. I remember in high school and working in Portland, some of the people were sympathetic towards the Germans. They thought they were all right. They thought that Hitler was maybe doing a good job. And I know in politics, it's a little bit like right now with some people think that Muslims are okay. Well, there's a lot of people that disagree with that, and a lot of people disagree with Hitler. Well, as soon as that war started, it all changed. He was our enemy. And the Japanese are our super enemies. In fact, we were all upset in school there because it just so happened that year, Oregon State had won the Rose Bowl.
Oh.
And we're going to play in Pasadena, and we're going to play Duke University. And several of us were going to try and go down there and see the game. Well, as soon as Pearl Harbor happened, they canceled that. There was no more assembly of people that large on the Pacific coast because they thought the Japanese were going to come over and bomb. So the game was played back in Durham, North Carolina. So we were mad at the Japanese because we didn't get to go to the game. Oregon State did win, by the way. They beat them 21-16.
Great. You were happy for that, huh?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's just cover your military training a little bit here. How did that, after you were joined up, where did you go, and what kinds of training did you get?
Well, as soon as I graduated, in fact, I was a senior, and they wanted all seniors. I had already been accepted in the Air Force, but they wanted me to graduate first. As soon as I graduated, 1 week later, I got my special orders and was sent to Santa Ana Army Air Base down in Santa Ana. That was a pre-flight school, where you'd go to ground school for about 2 or 3 months, and then they'd send you out to primary, basic, and advanced. Well, when I got there, a week after I got there, all of us that had this civilian pilot training and had a license, they pulled us out and sent us to a special instructor school at Mather Field, California. I went through basic, primary, basic, and advanced all in one place. We'd finished primary training, and we flew the Ryan PT-22 in primary. About 5 weeks of that we'd finish on a Friday, and on Monday we started basic. In other words, they shoved us through real fast, the same way advanced and instructor. So by middle of January, I had my wings and became an instructor, and they sent me to Gardner Field, California, in a basic flying school that was instructing in the Vultee, we call it the Vultee vibrator.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 450 horsepower, good airplane, and I was a basic trainer for them, and we taught them formation flying and instrument flying and some acrobatics, but not much there. They got that in advance. And anyway, then I was there for a year and had volunteered for P-38 training, and 10 of us were sent to Williams Field, Arizona, and we were supposed to get checked out in the P-38. The most I got was a ride, and they had one with a jump seat where you could observe the pilot flying. I got an hour ride like that. But the colonel, this was also an advanced flying school where they taught cadets in advance in AT-6s. So the CO of the base called us in and he said, "Gentlemen, we lost 10 of our best instructors last week to P-47, so you're going to stay here and instruct in AT-6s. So I stayed there for about 6 months instructing in AT-6s. Finally got out of that and went into the very heavy program. That's another story.
Okay, Bob. Why don't you go into that one then?
Well, what happened, by that time, I'd accumulated a lot of hours. I had about 2,500 hours. And anyone with very much time, then when you go to the very heavy program, which was the B-29s, you had to have, I think, 2,000 hours at that time, or 1,500. And so they sent me to Hobbs, New Mexico to go through the B-17 transition in a B-17 4-engine transition. And then from there we went to the 20th Air Force and ended up at Davis-Monthan Field in Tucson. And that's the B-29. And that was just a joy to fly after flying the B-17. The B-17 is a nice flying airplane, but when you're sitting up there at 20,000 feet or 25, the B-17 flying formation, heavy flying clothes and everything, but you're still freezing. Your hands would freeze because most of our electric suits didn't work in that anyway. When you got into B-29, you go up to 30,000 feet, and it's all pressurized. You're sitting there at inside altimeter showing 8,000 feet, and you're in your shirt sleeves and eating in-flight lunches. Boy, it was a nice airplane.
It was a big improvement, huh?
Yeah. Anyway, we ended up there at Davis Mountain crew. We finished the phase and crew training, and we were waiting for our orders. In fact, we actually had orders. We were going to take off and fly to Saipan and start bombing the Japanese mainland from either Saipan, Tinian, or Guam. And that was on a Tuesday, and my wife was getting ready to go home to her folks in Burbank with our little boy. And on Thursday, they dropped the atom bomb. So when they dropped the atom bomb in Hiroshima, they held up our orders. They said, you're still going to go. You're going to relieve the crews over there now, because they were concerned about the Russians. However, we never did go. So we stayed there for several months, and I ended up being an instructor in a B-29. The pilots coming back from Europe had to get their flying time to get their 4 hours flight pay, so we'd take a bunch of them up in the B-29, make about a 8 or 10 hour circle around the state of Texas and come back and get their flying time in. And then I eventually got out, separated, stayed in the reserve, worked as a pharmacist for about 4 years, but one weekend a month I'd go down to Long Beach and I was flying B-26s, the Douglas B-26. And in fact, we had our 2 weeks active duty, and we were all combat qualified, my crew was, and for dropping bombs out of the B-17 and strafing and all that. Korean War started, and a week later we got a telegram and ended up over in Korea and stayed there a year, flew 55 combat missions, and made it back.
So somewheres along the line here, you met your wife and got married when you were
That's right.
in service. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That was interesting because I knew Dorothy. She was a blind date when I was instructing in BT-13s there at Bakersfield. A friend of mine was going with a girl in Los Angeles, and he said, "You come in and meet Joan's friend. She's a real nice girl." So I went in and met Dorothy, and we got along real good, and that was, maybe 5-6 months later is when we'd see her about every other weekend. I'd go up there and see her. Joan and Dorothy would come down, and occasionally to Gardner Field on Saturday night we'd have a party in the officers club. Anyway, when I was going to go to P-38s and leave there, I told her, well, probably go overseas. It was supposed to be a quick ticket overseas before the invasion in P-38. So I said, well, when I come back, you're still around interested, I'll look you up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so she agreed. So anyway, when they're at Williams Field, when they told us we're going to stay there instructing AT-6s, I said, well, that's a bunch of baloney. So I called Dorothy and I said, you want to get married now? She did. So anyway, we got married and stayed there, rented a house at Chandler, Arizona. And had a great summer there because every night we'd meet at the officers club and have dinner. And she and some of the other wives would spend the daytime out by the pool. And so it was a tough way to fight a war, but somebody had to do it.
Okay, and now it's how many years later?
63 years. 63
Congratulations.
years. Still married. Yeah.
But then Korea called you, and
That's
how
right.
did that go?
Well, it went real good because I made it back.
Right.
A lot of them didn't. That was a tough war. They call it the Forgotten War. And it's tough that we lost 3,000 men in Iraq, but in the Korean War we lost 50,000. Killed or missing and a lot of wounded. And I know in our outfit, the 42nd Bomb Wing, we lost about a third of them by the time we came back. And but again, I was lucky when I first got there. They sent me on a special mission I happened to be current in the C-47, or the DC-3 was the commercial version. And we had 3 of those airplanes attached to the 452nd Bomb Wing for administrative purposes. So they called me up and said, gave me a co-pilot and an engineer and said, fly over to Korea and report to this major at Daegu Airport, 21st Troop Carrier. So anyway, I did that, and for a couple of weeks I was just flying all around Korea. North Korea was still in our hands then. That was just as the Chinese were coming into the war. And we were ferrying supplies and troops and ammunition and so forth to different bases. And I ended up helping evacuate the 1st Marine Division and the 7th Infantry Division from the Chosan Reservoir area. That was in the winter, December of 1950, very cold. And all we were able to do, the Marines had carved out a strip up there on the frozen ground with bulldozers, and all we could, C-47 is the only thing to get in there, 3,000 feet, but with full flaps we get in there. And all we could do is evacuate the wounded. We put the wounded on the floor of the airplane and fly them down to Hungnam, which was a major base about only 20 minutes away down on the coast, transfer them either to the hospital ships out in the harbor or to a hospital plane and fly them over to Japan. So that was an interesting thing.
Okay, so did you continue on the C-47, or did you get into
No, then when I got back, well, I flew the C-47 a lot, but at that time I came back and I had another duty as a flight test pilot. The planes that got damaged go to the maintenance squadron and they repair a rudder or this, that, and then I'd flight test them.
Where was that?
That was a base called Miho, Japan,
Okay.
which was, we had taken over that base. The Australians had taken it after the war, and it had been a 0-0 assembly line base for the Japanese. And it was a nice base and good runways and all that. And that's where we then started our B-26s for starting in January. We're flying their combat missions, day missions from there over to Korea. And I didn't start flying my combat mission, the B-26, till the spring. And they moved us over to Busan, Korea, and that's where I flew mine out of.
Okay. You want to move the picture
Oh, the
there?
B-29,
We'll
yeah.
show a picture of the
B-29.
B-26 here.
This is interesting. I want to tell you about the B-29 too.
Okay.
You know, in the B-17 back there, you get in there, the bombardier navigators down in front, then you got to jump up here and you got to go up here, the pilot and the co-pilot, and then back here is the radio man and the engineer. It's kind of spread around. Here, right in this front, bombardiers in the front, right behind me is the pilot and the co-pilot, and right over here is the flight engineer. Everything is, and the navigator's right back here in this window. Everything was so close I could reach up and touch the bombardier with my foot. I could look right over there at the flight engineer, and we could almost talk back and forth. We had intercom, but I could see all the engine instruments. So it was a very compact airplane. And then the pressurized, to get into the back part here, they had a rail, they had a little train, and you just sit on that, and you could go back and get in the waste compartment if you had to.
So it was a tube down the middle of
Exactly,
the... Yeah.
exactly. And that window, and
Little
this
subway.
this had 2 bomb bays, by the way, forward and aft bomb bay. It carried a lot of bombs.
Yeah, big airplane.
And that's the B-26, the Douglas B-26. That's confusing because in World War II they had the Martin Marauder, which was called the B-26. And when this first came out, it was called the A-26 at the end of World War II. And then they did away with the Martin B-26, and they changed the designation on this to a B-26, B-26 light bomber. Good airplane. It had the R-28. These are painted black because our wing eventually went into all-night intruders. And we would, for instance, in my squadron, we had 16 B-26s, and we would take off every 10 minutes during the night, a single ship. And it was all instruments. Every approach we came back would be a GCA approach, a ground control approach. And we did a lot of radar bombing. On every mission, we'd have a bomb bay full of about 6,000 pounds of bombs, usually 500-pounders, sometimes 100-pound incendiaries. And we would report over the bomb line to Joint Operational Control, and they would have us go in at 10,000 feet, and they would vector us in by radar and tell us when to drop our bombs. And if their intelligence was right, it was right on the troop concentrations. And then we would take off and we would control or patrol a section of the North Korean roads up there from the Yalu River clear down to the 38th parallel, which was the bomb line. And we looked for targets of opportunity. We would, the Chinese had to move most of their stuff at night, Chinese and North Koreans. Because in the daytime, our B-26s and the Marine Corsairs, the P-51s and F-80s kept them pretty well, and they had to move their supplies like 300 and some miles. And so they tried to move them all at night. Well, that was our job, to disturb them at night, drop flares, locate them, then strafe them at night, which we did.
And how long did you do this?
Well, I did it till I got a total of 55 missions in, and then that was our combat tour. I did that by middle of September of 51, and then I was taken off, and then I came back. I got back on October 31st of 51, 1 year after, the day after I left. But an interesting thing in this B-26 at night, on one of our, I told you about the all-weather. This was a monsoon type storm, and I don't know why, but they let me get out to the end of the runway, and I revved up the engines, and they were good, but it was miserable. I could only see halfway down the runway, but we gave it the nod and we took off, and got to where our target was supposed to be, but we're in the soup solid at about 10,000 feet, and I didn't know how we were going to get to that target because it was a fuel dump at Sinanju. I've got it here. Let's see where here it was. Yeah. In fact, the Air Force magazine came out in October of 2000 with a summary of the Korean War, and they stated here, July 14th, in one of the more spectacular night strikes of the war, a single B-26 of the 42nd Bomb Wing attacked 2 enemy convoys north of Sinanju in the early morning hours, claiming 68 vehicles destroyed or damaged and a fuel dump destroyed. Anyway, I want to give credit to my navigator, Ashley Jones, who is not with us. He was killed after I finished my 55 missions. He went to another crew, and he was killed a couple nights later. But anyway, the navigator, depending on the mission, he was sitting in the seat right next to me, what would be a co-pilot seat. And I said, Ashley, do you know where we are? He said, sure, Woody, I know exactly where we are. I said, okay, well, give me a heading. If we take a westerly heading and start a letdown, we should not hit a mountain to be where the ocean is. So he gave me the heading, and we started a letdown at about 500 feet a minute. And boy, I'll tell you, it is stormy. We're rocking all over the place. But at about 1,800 feet, it started to break up. And we could see at 1,500 feet, we came out, and right dead ahead of us was lights. They had their lights on. This was the fuel dump. And so anyway, we toggled out the bombs, right 500 pounders right down there, all kinds of flashes and fires. And we went back up in the soup and made it back. But there was only 2 ships that night in the whole 5th Air Force that got off, and we were the only one to hit the target, our target.
Wow.
Excuse me, I'd like to break in here for just a moment.
Let's see. I'll take this other thing, so I'll keep that in case,
Oh, yes.
in case he wants it there.
Do that. Okay, I guess we were
Oh, is it on now?
finishing, yeah, it's
Okay.
still on.
They're gonna end it anyway, aren't they?
We're, yeah. We'll want to finish up after you got back from Korea and,
Worked as a
What-
pharmacist, yeah.
yeah, and you were in the reserves and,
Yeah, stayed in the reserve, and so long enough so I got 23 effective years, and so at age 60 I went into the retired reserves, and I have a retired card, so that was a good deal because I can get on any military base, and we use that in the summertime. We take our motorhome down to Camp Pendleton. They have an RV park right on the ocean there. That's pretty nice.
okay, sounds good. So what about your family? You had one son?
One son, and he's now with the FAA. He became a pilot. That's Mike, and he's been with the FAA for 20 years now. And he was with SkyWest. Was captain of SkyWest, but about 20 years ago he had a chance to go with the FAA, which he did. He's very, very glad of it now because he's nearing a retirement year and age, and another 4 or 5 years he'll retire from the FAA.
Okay, so, and you have moved out to the desert here?
Yeah, so I should talk about my other son. We have
Oh.
another son, Jerry. He was
Oh,
born
okay.
after I got back from Korea.
Okay,
And he's a professor of medicine at the University of Kentucky Medical School in Lexington. He's an immunologist, and he teaches immunology and all that. And I have a grandson. His son, Scott, is an engineering major at the University of Colorado, sophomore. And my other grandson, Mike's son, is a fireman and a paramedic up in Folsom, and he married about 2 years ago and just had a son, and that's my great-grandson.
Wow.
So now I have a great...
Congratulations.
I have 2 sons, 3 grandsons, and 1 great-grandson.
great.
No girls. My wife is kind of upset. She wishes she had a girl. She likes all the boys, but we'd like to have a girl, so we're telling the grandsons to get busy.
Okay. So, when did you move out to the desert then?
Oh, and, well, whenever all the kids left home and finished school and all that, about we sold our house in 1982. Anyway, we moved out here in 85, something like that.
Okay. So
In fact, we were going back and forth. We had a condo out at Indian Palms Country Club, and we also had a place in Brookings, Oregon. We had a lot of friends up there, and we had a fishing boat, and we'd go up there in the summertime and go salmon fishing, come down here. We eventually sold out up there and moved into Lake Lakina about 10 years ago. That's where we are now.
Okay. And how did you become involved with the museum here in the DNA?
Well,
volunteer?
interesting, I came down here when it first opened 10, 12 years ago, and Harold Williamson was in charge then, and he's a friend of mine in the Quiet Birdman Club, and he tried to get me to come down as a docent, but I was too busy. In those days, I was working a couple of days a week as a pharmacist, so I just didn't have time. But I've flown, well, not half of the airplanes, but many. I've flown the DC-3, C-47, the B-17, well, they don't have B-29, but I've flown the B-26, the Douglas B-26 they have there, Invader, and I've flown the B-25, and I've flown the AT-6. We have instructed in that. And what's another one? I flew that Ryan down there, Ryan primary trainer. I flew that in primary. So it's just fun. I like it down there. It's old memories, you know.
Great. Let's see, what was the? I had a question and now I forgot it. How much time are you spending on coming out here?
Oh, to the Air Museum?
Yeah.
Well, 1 or 2 days a week, on Saturdays.
And you're working on the floor down?
Yeah, I work in the European and the B-17 hangar. I'd like to be in I wish that 26 was in the 26 is in the Navy hangar, because the version they have was a Navy plane, but I'd like to be around that. But I did fly the B-17 quite a bit, so I've been working on that a lot and help conduct cruise tours through it.
Mhm.
I get up in the crew compartment.
Are you doing any flying yourself anymore, or did you?
Well, now I still have my pilot's license, and
Right.
I still passed my physical about a year ago.
Okay,
I'm still
right.
good for another year of my physical. But I have a couple of friends that have airplanes. One has a twin Aztec, Billy Watson. I fly with him occasionally. And then I have another friend that has a Baron. I used to rent airplanes down at the Bermuda Dunes, Cessna 172, but it's become very expensive. I used to run them for $50 an hour. Now they want $125 an hour.
Wow.
So
Everything's going up.
that's kind of expensive just to go up and bore holes in the sky.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you would like to add? I think.
Guys, no, that's my life.
Okay. Well, we thank you for participating in this interview, and wish you well for the future.
Thank you, Darrell. Yeah, I'd like to. I should say I'd like to be here on my 90th birthday, and maybe I can some way talk JD, the pilot, into taking me up in the B-26 if I pay for the gas.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a good objective.
Yeah.
How soon is that? When's your birthday again?
Well, that will be next September. I'm 89 now, so I'll be 90 in September.
Okay. Well, I'll come out to see
I'm
you.
lucky. My eyes are good. I had cataract surgery. I can see better now than I could when I was 25.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Keep up the good work.
Okay. Well, thanks, Darrell.
Thank you.